Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Friday stream of the Offline Network. We have Akshay Mehra of Hummingbird Ventures as a first guest today. We don't have much in terms of news, but 𝗬𝗏 and I were at the equity list mixer last evening with our friend Kashish, and the buzz going around was 𝗂𝗏 is coming to India. It's setting up shop, and people asking each other, "Hey, have you gotten in touch already?" And by the time we got back from the evening, it turned out it was fake news. So what do you
Funny
make of that?
and funny, but we'll ask our guests at some point today on what they make of it. Like, should 𝗂𝗏 really come to India
Yeah.
or this thing? But we'll wait for the guests to like warm up first. Dhruv, why don't you open us?
So Akshay, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. And why don't you start by telling us a little more about the firm, about Hummingbird, and the paths that led you there?
Yeah, of course. No, it's great to be here with Sav and Dhruv. Excited to chat. So, a bit about Hummingbird to quickly start. At a high level, we're a global fund based out of the UK and London, have teams investing all over the world. So, people in the Bay Area, New York, Boston, Brussels, London, and I'm based in Mumbai. We do pre-seed to Series B investing. So, typically anything from 500,000 to $20 million in first check. And I would say the unique thing about us as a fund, and 𝗬𝗏 knows this better because we have a bit of history with him as well, which I can talk about. But the unique thing about us as a fund is we're extremely low frequency investors. So typically, venture investing, there's this notion of the power law, and to some degree, placing your bets in such a way where you're spraying and praying. And we try to flip that on its head and try to be as precise as possible. So we do about 3 to 5 investments globally every year at the early stage. And we do so by kind of doing that on a global basis, but also capping our fund size to 200 million every 3 to 4 years. And want to work closely with founders. We give them, time. We have almost 100% rate of follow on, and we just want to be patient partners to amazing companies. And we've had the great fortune of working with amazing businesses in India like NVIDIA, Jupiter, OneCard, Aspora, Pristine Care, and globally names like Kraken, Deliveroo, more recently Lovable Labs and Etched. So it's been a great ride for us as a firm. And yeah, I would say we're agnostic. We take a very geo and vertically agnostic view, but we're just obsessed. And I want to underscore the word obsessed, but obsessed about finding outlier talent and founders to work with.
Akshay, I think you're giving a very modest view of the Hummingbird world. Like, I mean, there was this piece in the Generalist, right? The most successful VC firm that you've never heard of. And most of our listeners wouldn't have heard of Hummingbird, right? Even people in the startup ecosystem who I still meet, who spent 10 years in the ecosystem, they barely know you. But tell us why the firm got started, how it got started, some of the successful ones. I think the biggest early hit was Kraken and a Turkish gaming company as well. How do you find founders in Turkey, in Australia, in India? Like, paint a picture of the firm for us, like more clearly.
Yeah, no, and I just want to preface this by saying that I had nothing to do with the early success, right? I joined about 4.5 years ago, and we have had a good run since then. But a lot of the early success, which you spoke about itself, predates back to maybe 2010, I want to say, when Hummingbird started officially. And the whole thesis when Baran started the fund was that technology, the wind always blows in different directions, but what stays constant is the founder. And we built a view, and now that has been much more solidified and calcified, and that we think that great founders have a really, really strong why behind why they're operating, right? And the chip on the shoulder is really strong. It's linked to often their childhood and the stories they tell themselves, and we can speak more about that later if interesting. But the early success, we basically try to go where other people don't go. And so, for example, Kraken in 2013 or early 14, Mount Gox hack had occurred. Nobody wanted to touch crypto, but we found this incredible founder in Jesse in this company called Kraken, and were the early investors there, early lead investors. And we also went to geographies where nobody wanted to kind of compete or thought that it was too shallow of a market, like Turkey, right? So in Turkey, we invested in 2 gaming companies. One was Peak Games, the other was Gram Games. And in Gram Games, my partner Firat had sourced that at the early days and helped build the early team. And we were the only round of funding in the company, and that eventually got sold to Zynga for $550 million in cash. So we had that ownership, and that was a multiple fund returner for us. And similarly, in Peak Games, Siddhar is a very special founder, very nonlinear background, high intensity. He built an incredible team around him, and we were early first investors there, and that sold to Zynga for close to $2 billion in cash. So that's kind of the early success, and it really just solidified this view for us that we want to allow the returns and the companies we back and the founders we work with to speak louder than marketing materials. And so that's why it kind of makes sense to some degree that many people haven't heard of us. But we truly treat venture as a craft, and we just want to make sure that we are as supportive as we can to the greatest founders out there.
What
And
allows you guys to take these?
Sorry, I want to dig into the numbers as well. The generalist article mentioned some numbers as well, the returns on those funds.
Yeah.
You want to share them publicly?
Yeah, it was quite dated in the sense that it was published, I think, about a year and a half ago, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll just give you rough numbers. I don't want to go into too much of detail. But yeah, the first few funds that have been around for now, close to 10 years or so, they all have DPIs upwards of 9x and TVPIs up close to 14x. TVPI being fair market value and DPI means distributions. And actually, our current fund, Hummingbird 5, is off to a good start as well, because it's a $200 million fund, 2023 vintage. And we've been fortunate to work with some great companies like 𝗧𝗵𝗲, 𝗨𝗶𝗄𝗏, 𝗏𝗏 as well. And so we're on track to hopefully do better than the prior performance as well.
I was asking you, Akshay, what do you think allows you guys to stand apart from the crowd and make these non-consensus bets? Is it how you're structured? Is it a cultural thing? What's the conversation you have inside of the firm?
Yeah, so I think it can be split into various ways, right? I think, Dhruv, to be honest, there are some investments that we lean into much more than our peers in the venture community, because we truly believe, for us, if you think about an investment decision as an equation, for us, it's really 95 to 99% the founder. And a lot of VC firms, of course, are founder focused, but it can probably tap into the 75% probability or potential as opposed to 95, right? So we sometimes see special people that are probably operating in markets that are a bit weird, too niche, or too uncertain. And we just have the ability to then make those investments, right? I think for Vance, which is now branded as 𝗧𝗵𝗲, is a good example where I led the seed round in 2022, and a lot of question marks, right? They were pivoting while we invested, but we saw this special founder in Parth and wanted to work with him. So that's one set of circumstances where we tend to go ahead, where we just see a special person and we win those deals. The other is, if you think about like OneCard in our India portfolio, InVideo, for example, these are excellent companies where we've worked with local firms like Peak 15, Matrix, and in those cases, we typically are just a different voice around the table, and different being the key word there, which is nobody has a right voice in venture. I just think it's about providing different perspectives. We have a weird DNA, Belgian firm based in London, operating globally. And so I think founders generally appreciate that and want us around the table. So that's typically how we think about Edge. But if I had to distill it down to one word, it's talent. We are really laser focused on unpacking or uncovering what makes a great person across the screen that we're speaking to, or in person when we meet them. And if we can see things that other people miss. And also as a fund, we've kind of leaned into it heavily, such that we don't subscribe to, let's go back to A16Z, right? We don't want to compete with the platform VC like A16Z, but we want to have the best talent team in the world where we can place great operators into our portfolio companies as well, right? So it's really leaning into that whole notion of talent for us.
And I mean, everyone is making noise, right? I mean, everyone has a podcast, everyone has a newsletter, everyone's active, their partners are posting actively. In this world of ultra noisy, sort of competitive world, in the world of venture and big brand building exercises, events, and all of those things, what is the right to win for Hummingbird? Suppose, you approached a founder, a hot founder per se, in India. Would your existing track record be that, or what would be the right to win for a Hummingbird partner?
I almost feel like if you're marketing in general, right, as a venture fund, as a company, you can, I think, again, it's like a barbell situation where if you're on one end of the barbell and you're loud, as you mentioned, 𝗀𝗧𝗵, and you have podcasts and you have events and community, that's one way of doing it, which is great and which is obviously proven and fairly consensus. But I also think there's something to be said about mystique and focusing on quality over quantity. Um, I would say obviously we lean into the latter, which is we don't proactively want to have mystery around us, but I just think by focusing on returns, it's much slower, but people will kind of get to know you eventually, at least those in the know. We have a high quality publication like the Generalist kind of write about us after many years of being quiet. And look, I think it's something we want to work on. But it's to answer your question more directly on why founders want to work with us. Sometimes founders, they think that signal is really strong, right? When they come across investors that actually aren't leaning too much into marketing, they actually prefer that quite a bit. But I'll be lying to you if I tell you that we don't lose to the larger brands that are more well known, because founders want to optimize for brand and signaling that comes from those brands, right? So there's no correct answer here. Sometimes it's leading into the mystique. Sometimes it's founder venture capital firm fit where they just prefer our approach. And sometimes it's just speed, right? I think, 𝗀𝗧𝗵, you've seen us before, but if we like something and because we're so hell-bent on founders, we kind of want to move as fast as possible, and nothing beats conviction for breakfast. And I'm really sure of that. Like, I think if you can show conviction with speed and independent thinking, it's really, really powerful.
I'm waiting to get into the founder archetype thing. Akshay, you said we'll talk about that later. And I read something really cool earlier today from Tim Draper, where he said his son, and the framing was very interesting. His son says that the Drapers like to invest in founders who are either rational with irrational thinking, like rational founders with irrational thinking. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting this wrong. Like, I think rational founders with irrational work or something, and then the other way around. Forget this.
Mhm.
I'm
So
definitely
they want to
gonna
invest in both of those categories or just one over the other?
I'm actually going to look for this because I do
All
want to
right.
get this right. But over to Akshay to talk about how they like to pick, and then I'll
Yeah, look,
fill us up.
I think it's a question we get quite often, and it's one of those things where you have to kind of live it and breathe it and be exposed to it over a longer amount of time to kind of understand it. But I can try my best to basically share. Um, but yeah, we basically want to spot people and work with people that have an extremely high sense of urgency. They almost feel like they don't have enough time in the day. They have a sense of paranoia about them that what they're building has to be done immediately. And that doesn't mean that it's a poor work product, but they have this really fast clock speed around learning, applying those learnings, and building their business with speed, right? I think that's one thing we look for. The other thing, which goes back to what I was saying around Hummingbird, but we believe that great founders are absolutely obsessed with talent, right? They just have no room for mediocrity, no mental space for mediocrity. They obviously give people enough rope and time, but they want to maintain a high bar and a high bar for excellence. And for example, 𝗀𝗧𝗵 is also invested with 𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏 Like, he interviewed everybody until there were more than 500 employees, right? Even if it's a 5-minute call, but you have that paranoia
Yeah.
around building a company, around maintaining a bar for talent. That's key. And we also want to work with people that are extreme independent thinkers. They almost operate in their own kind of worldview and don't get kind of pushed around too much. So they're a bit disagreeable, to your point, Dhruv, what you mentioned earlier. So disagreeable people that are maybe not the best employees. They don't take too much direction because they have such a firm view of the world of what they're doing that they want to execute on it. And that's a byproduct typically of sometimes adversity, childhood adversity, sometimes bullying, sometimes having a strong chip on the shoulder that makes them want to push forward really, really hard. And the quintessential examples out there, right? Whether it's Elon Musk's relationship with his dad or Steve Jobs being
Mm.
adopted and having that nonlinear path and an independent mind that comes from it. So that's what I try to distill it down to. It
Mm.
obviously can't be done on a quick podcast, but
How does it show up in like, if you think back to the last couple of founders you partnered with, how does it show up in meetings and in interactions?
That's the line of questioning, right? We
Yeah.
typically, one of the pieces of feedback we collect over the years and founders, going back to what you talked about around winning, it's they kind of come off the calls with us and they're like, what just happened? Because you go into a VC call and it's about churn numbers, it's about business model, it's about TAM, and you come on with us and we're like asking you about your life story and what makes you tick. And it's so different, right, from most venture calls. So it's around the line of questioning, I would say, more than anything else.
Yeah.
And you've done a bunch in AI as well, right? 𝗨𝗶𝗀, I think, was a big one for you guys.
Yeah,
What's the story there? Who was the partner involved at Hummingbird?
yeah. So Nikita, who is based in London, but she has a Swedish background. She met Anton fairly early, before he was ending his previous company, I believe. And we invested before there was anything. He was working on this product called GPT Engineer, and very early days. And we saw exactly what I just described around bar for talent, nonlinear background, had a chip on the shoulder from his previous company not being a massive success, and he wanted to make things happen. And fortunately for us, first investors, we continue to be the largest shareholders there as well. But that's been an amazing ride. I think from pre-launch to almost 200 million in revenue now in maybe 18 months.
And Akshay, you write a lot. We've had a chance to go through your Substack as well, Amplify. And of course, you're a musician as well, but we save that for later, even though it's Friday. Are you still playing music?
Yeah, I try to.
Yeah.
I wrote my last original compositions a couple of years ago, but I try to actually make time quite often, because it's honestly what I grew up doing, and I don't want to let go of that. I think it's
Which
important.
instrument do you play, Akshay?
Guitar.
Oh, wow.
Where can
Yeah.
people find you? We'll
Spotify. I mean, I don't advertise it too much, but my
Akshay is on
Spotify under my.
Nice.
Love it.
So one final piece before we invite Anand as well. Your last piece is on May 14th. It says the invisible game, staying awake while playing a game you can't win. If you were to give our listeners and us a 1-minute summary, what does it convey?
Yeah, look, I think the game here is obviously the craft of venture investing, and I think it's a game that we talk about. We try to kind of make sense of it, right? This is a bit of philosophy where you try to make sense of the boundaries of the game, but in actuality, it is a mental game out there. When you speak to a specific founder or someone you want to invest in, I think there's just a lot of ambiguity, randomness, and this desire to put things into boxes. But in actuality, I think the staying awake bit is just keeping a really, really open mind and being aware of your biases and the dissonance that comes from past experiences, and just going in with a fresh perspective as much as you can. So I try to kind of verbalize that as much as I can and summarize it as possible. But that's really what I think about. I think about venture, especially seed stage and pre-seed stage, as a mental game, and almost approaching each call with a blank canvas more than anything else, and not trying to put things into boxes or thinking about verticals or TAM and business model too quickly, and making assumptions based on that.
Love it. On that note, let's welcome Anand as well. So we will have our first duet segment on the TON show for the first time. So we'll spend 5-7 minutes with both of you together, and then we want to. Anand's had a bit of a LinkedIn update as well. Last time he was on the show a few weeks back, he was running a different company. Now he started another one. So much to learn from Anand whenever he comes and we chats with us. So Anand, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, good to be back.
Hey, Anand.
Good morning
Yeah,
again. I know it's super early.
Hi, Akshay.
SF.
Yeah,
Have you met
yeah,
actually before?
No, we haven't. Good
We
to
haven't.
meet you, Akshay.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I've heard amazing things about you. I think we spoke once or twice on WhatsApp, but that was the extent of it. So it's good to see you.
So Anand, I mean, what Akshay was describing about pre-seed investing, how much of that do you agree with, and what's your take? You're an active angel investor, and I mean, of course, with a fund as well.
I missed a little bit of the segment, but I would say the last part that I heard, I really like that. I think even connecting that to backing the lovable founder before they had what is now a great product. I think sometimes these stories are not linear, and to just kind of stick with the founder and the story as it evolves, because I think that it also gives the founder some malleability as they're building the company. Sometimes I feel like the founders are extremely clear about the vision, and what they're malleable about is the tactics, right? My sort of favorite example of that is the first time I met the founders of NoBroker. I was visiting their office in Bangalore, and I used to live in Delhi. And I had a lot of trouble finding their office, right? And I was like borderline frustrated, and I was saying, why can't you make your office a little bit more discoverable, right? You can put your sign up. And they're like, we're so sorry, but all the brokers have gotten together and they've broken into our office multiple times. And they thought that destroying our computers would, get us to stop building NoBroker, right? And so there, like they had to shift their tactics. They had to be in a nondescript office. They had to hide out for a while, but they didn't give up on the vision. And the vision has always been the same. It's a very high-tech approach to, bringing supply and demand together in a peer-to-peer marketplace, right? So sometimes I think the vision is really clear from day one, and it's the tactics that are malleable. But sometimes the vision itself is malleable, right? Like we see so many examples. The most notable one that all of us probably have heard the story is the Slack story, right? It started as a game in a gaming company, and then it became, pretty much the de facto communication platform in businesses today. And so allowing for a little bit of malleability. And I don't know, Akshay, perhaps the fact that you have sort of an exposure to music and other ways, because when I think of collaboration and people say, what's a great example? I use the same example that Steve Jobs used to use, which is, like every musician in the Beatles is not the best musician ever, but the Beatles are the best band, right? And so there's something to be said about like allowing for that malleability both
Mm-hmm.
within the founding group as well as between the founders and the investor.
One typically hears two versions of this, Anand, which is like one version is you have to be able to serve in order to lead. And then the second version is that the best founders are, as Akshay was also saying, disagreeable. They have a chip on their shoulder. They're not always very easy to get along with. And so you've of course had a ton of experience. How do you feel about this?
I think there's something to be said about that archetype, and I think where that comes from is, like there's this heuristic that I've heard from a lot of investors that I really like, which is the best founders tend to have like one leg in the past and in the present and one leg in the future. Um, and I think the fact that they are somewhat disagreeable and hard to get along comes from the frustration that they've already lived in the future. Right. And they're like quite impatient to like bring everybody there. And if somebody is like dragging their feet and will not move fast and wants to work from home all the time and all of that stuff, right? Like it's frustrating because they're already living in the future and they're like, I want to get there faster. And like people are, and by the way, that's where I would put a lot of these debates is like, do you have an impatience for that future once it's so clear how you can go from here to there? Because I think like in every industry, going from the present to the future, if that's like something that's really important to you, it's not a straight line, right? And sometimes you see this through line to go from the present to the future in any space. And at that point, if you don't like ramp up execution insanely, you could lose that moment, right? And then you wait for the next moment, but you don't want to lose those moments. So, I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, sometimes for founders. And I don't think it's, a lot of people waking up and saying, I want to be disagreeable. I think it's that they don't want to compromise on
Yeah.
that, taking people from the present to the future.
It kind of goes back to what Anand, I don't know if you joined at this point, but Dhruv had asked me what we look for in some of the founders we work with. And it kind of goes back to exactly what you mentioned, which is they have this sense of urgency about them, right? They see the future, they want to execute really quickly. It's a nonlinear path and they know that, but they want to iterate as fast as possible to get there. And yeah, it basically aligns exactly what you just mentioned.
Akshay, by the way, I found the line that I'd goofed up earlier, which is, irrational people doing rational things or rational people doing irrational things. Very beautiful
Great.
framing. Yes.
All right. So
Interesting.
Coming back to stuff that's more topical. So on this show, we've actually covered so many headlines. Every day, there's a fill in the blank between 10 billion to 100 billion is passed around in the CapEx world of AI. What are your views on what's happening? Like, it's very hard to keep up with this circular economy that's driving this, I mean, insanely heavy CapEx into the world of AI, and most of it revolving around open AI. And you're involved, both of them. I mean, Anand, you're now closely involved as an operator as well in the world of AI. You recently raised from 𝗀𝗧 as well yesterday. And Akshay, of course, has a view into the world of AI across the world. So give us your individual opinions on this.
Yeah, I can
Go ahead,
start.
Anand.
Or Akshay, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Anand.
Yeah, I think the idea of finding design partners for a new product that you put together, and as a result, doing a deeper deal where there's vendor financings involved and there is deeper collaboration involved, especially when you're looking to sort of create a certain amount of capacity that you can fill up with the demand that you have. I think of OpenAI also as less of a LLMs and model company and more of a consumer subscription company at this point, right? So there is a very
800
clear
million.
business model. And the models are differentiating themselves also, where Anthropic is focused on code generation, like that's what they are fantastic at, and have developed a niche around. And different models are monetizing in different ways. And then there are folks who are purely monetizing in a B2B API access way, which honestly seems to be the least leveraged way in terms of business model durability, because the model rates are still not flat, they're still declining, and there's a lot of discounting and so on. I think the reason people are a little bit worried is because most people in the investing world operate through pattern matching, and they're comparing what's going on to like the internet build out, right? When optical build out was happening 20 years ago in the US, and there was a lot of these vendor financing deals that were done by the vendors to the people that bought it without necessarily the demand for it, right? I mean, ultimately, the internet grew to a point where all that demand was lit up and all the spare capacity was lit up, but it was not done in a way that those vendors could recover the investments that they had done. The most notable bankruptcy being WorldCom back in the day, for those who are like going back in history. So I think it's probably bringing up those memories for people who are part of that. But I do think it's different in the sense that the demand seems extremely real. The value of these capabilities that are built are extremely real, and so the question is just kind of, is it about timing? I think what is also happening is it will create a culture of haves and have-nots. There are people who get these jobs, are in these companies, build out these startups, but there will be like disaffected folks, stakeholders in our universe. You think of the human agents in a contact center, right? But that you can apply that into every sector which is got a meaningful automation through AI. And the builders of these companies have to take a multi-stakeholder approach to kind of think about what is the journey of each of their stakeholders, right? Not just the investors and the founders, but also these other stakeholders like the human agents, and I'm sure there's an analogy in other sectors as well. I think that disaffection is probably driving, and will already drive, will continue to drive some of the misalignment between different parties. So that's probably what's going on. But I think it is mind blowing, right? Like especially the speed of the AI cycle is definitely like if you blink, you'll miss like a couple of revs of the cycle. And so that is definitely, it's fun for those of us like in it and have seen these platform shifts, but it can also be, a little bit like, it's like driving at 150 miles all the time. It can be a little bit overwhelming.
And the numbers
And
are
so,
crazy.
we're seeing all of that.
And the numbers are crazy, and it's the same names like popping up here and there, at least on the hardware side, like NVIDIA, AMD's come up now, warrants, OpenAI has warrants in AMD as well. So it's all fascinating.
Yeah.
Akshay, what's your macro perspective on this whole thing?
Yeah, just on your last point, 𝗀𝗧, it kind of reminds me of this interesting tweet I saw of this Japanese term called keiretsu, where you have all these large companies in Japan that have intertwined interests in each other, and they become too big to fail. So to your point on NVIDIA and AMD and everybody kind of working with each other, it does seem like we're moving in that direction. To what Anand was saying earlier, look, I think at a high level, it is a massive platform shift, right? I would argue there was this term that Bezos used way back in the day before he started Amazon about the internet and how he views it more as electricity that just kind of will go everywhere eventually in every nook and corner of the economy. And AI is the internet on steroids, right? So I do think it will seep into every different sector and vertical, and a few years out, it'll just be commonplace. You don't even need to have AI in your name anymore. It just would be part of your product and service. So I think the main theme, what we're seeing here is, to Anand's point, and he's seen this build out before in past cycles, but I just think it's people don't want to be left behind. And I think there is a gap that exists, but the demand is real. It's just about timing, as Anand said. And I think that it's the build out we're seeing and the investments we're seeing in conjunction with a lower cost of capital, because investors are willing to pay a lot of money to these companies and premiums on valuation multiples to companies that do these deals, that suddenly things also look cheaper in hindsight, right? If you think about once you announce these deals, you get tens of billions in market cap overnight. So cost of capital also plays a role, I think, in announcing these deals and going forward with it. So yeah, all said and done, it's exciting. It's a great time to be a founder, a venture investor for sure, because the upside of these companies is incredible. The psychological barrier of 1 trillion has been passed several times already. So it's an interesting time to be a tech investor, but it's a good time. And there is definitely a part of me and everybody, I'm sure, that feels a bit nervous. But I would say still net positive for me personally, given the demand we're seeing and how these products are changing.
All right. Akshay, thank you so much. We can go on for longer. We'll love to have you back on the show as well.
Absolutely.
It's a Friday.
Good to see you guys. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks
Bye.
for coming, Akshay.
All right, Anand. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts as well. But let's firstly go to the big headlines. You've recently announced a venture as well. And I mean, so much happening so quickly. What's the story behind the headlines?
Yeah, so we launched 𝗨𝗏 earlier this week. Last time we chatted, I was talking about Crescendo. Last week, the week before, we hit 100 million in top line revenue for Crescendo. And so nothing changes with Andy and my co-founder Andy and my roles at Crescendo. But as we were building that company, what we realized is we were moving rapidly up market and addressing labor budgets sort of in the mid-market enterprise. And what we realized is there is an opportunity for the smallest businesses, the ones with 1 to 20 employees. As consumers, we have the benefit of great AI tools. And as large enterprises, there are lots of tools being built like Crescendo. But what we felt is there was a segment in the middle, which is the very small businesses where they can't use consumer tools, but they also don't have the IT department or vendor selection teams and so on for an enterprise tool. So we decided to launch 𝗨𝗏 to go after that. We have a fantastic third co-founder who built a company called Wix, which is really considered one of the best, SMB tech software companies. So he was the chief operating officer of one of their largest divisions. And we're lucky to have him and his deep expertise also in building an SMB focused software company. We feel like over the last 20 years, there's probably been 3 or 4 major franchises building software for SMBs. There was, GoDaddy 20 years ago. Then you had Shopify as a 2nd generation tool. Then you had Wix coming up, a 3rd generation tool. And I think now there's room for an AI first 4th generation service, which really combines takes a little bit of the Crescendo principles and the playbook, which is, how cool would it be if we combined AI software and labor into one really simple offering. The problem statement is that 90% of SMBs die within the first 12 months, right? And, a long time ago, I was running an SMB business, and I was very intrigued about that problem statement. And so the smart question that you are, the only smart question to ask is, what do the other 10% of businesses do, right? The 10% that doesn't die. And the simplest answer that I got that was very interesting to me is that they have 1,000 people that try out the service or the product once that come back within the first 12 months, right? And if you can do that, then you don't die in the first year. And if you don't have the tools that allow you to do that, then you struggle to bring them back, and then sort of you get into that vicious cycle. And so that's what the service is designed to do. That we're building is designed to just kind of get you out of the starting gate, develop one-on-one relationships with the most loyal customers, and it really covers a gamut of use cases, whether it's post-order CX or a little bit of content marketing, or just a conversation about coming to the store, if a certain product is available, all of the above. And for different small businesses in different categories, there might be small capabilities that are unique to them, that are vertically oriented, but the generic interface and the chat that goes on between the SMB and its loyal customers, that's like pretty horizontal.
And Anand, what's your guess on what the adoption curve is going to look like? The other question to ask maybe is, when you explained to us what you're doing with Crescendo the last time around, and when you're going after the largest enterprises, AI transformation is like it's a C-suite
Topic.
priority. But for small business owners, do you think there's going to be natural pull for this? What do you think is going to drive adoption?
Yeah, I think ultimately the difference between the two segments is that there's very little time to waste, and there is very little mistakes that an SMB can make, right? It's all kind of life and death, right? Like they're not very large businesses, but what you realize is that no one calls themselves a small business, right? Like they all have big aspirations, and their small business is just a stepping stone to whatever the bigger aspirations that they have. And what you also realize is most of the folks are not technologists themselves, right? Like they, grew up wanting to make sneakers or bake cakes or what have you, and like that's why they started the business, not to kind of automate the CX side of the of their business. But what has also happened is they've had to give up their most loyal customers to third-party marketplaces. Used to be that you'd have a one-on-one relationship in the offline world. And as that migrated into the digital world, you sort of couldn't have that relationship one-on-one. And that's what these past platforms tried to do in different platform shift moments, is that, one of the platforms carried them to the first website. One of them carried them to like the ability to handle inventory and all that in the background, and so on, right? So now, we can kind of reclaim the one-on-one relationship with customers through, what is possible with AI. And so, we think that the adoption is more likely to be like a consumer adoption, people using it, like having an aha moment really quickly, and then the word of mouth spreading among small businesses. They also, most of them go to some like local chamber. Sometimes it's run by a city, sometimes it's run by private folks, where they talk to each other, right? Like they understand what tools each other are using. And that's where this word of mouth gets around, services that are really great. There's been, some recent examples of businesses that have grown entirely on SMB traction. The most notable example being MailChimp in the most recent days, completely grew on the back of supporting small businesses with their outreach campaigns. Again, you go back to this one-on-one relationship that they're craving to reclaim between them and their most loyal customers.
And what does the journey look like 1 year from now? What do you see as success for this new company?
Yeah, I think much like any other, new company, like our goal is to try to launch and we are privately building the product and working with SMBs right now. The goal is to be kind of out there and solve this very large pain point for SMBs. And I think like we can benefit from some of the lessons, particularly on product strategy and on kind of reframing the industry problem. We're in this unique time where 2, 3 years ago, if we had started the same company, it would have truly been incremental. But we're in this moment where the product offering can actually be 50 to 100x better than everything that's out there. The space is also tragically like very underserved. Sometimes you sort of say, oh, there are like players, but they're underserved. You could even say they are unserved, in the space, right? So I think there's a lot of appetite for this. And the nice thing is like all the SMB operators, the founders, they've all used, ChatGPT or Grok or something like that, and they understand what the benefits are personally, right? So they're already like sold on what the personal benefits are. Now they're sort of saying, I just need something that's custom for my business, right? So it can't be hallucinating. I can't have brand risk. There should be accuracy of responses. So they need that level of business sophistication, but they also, need that aha moment where someone can ping the business in the middle of the night and have an agent, kind of be empathetic and be around and, take care of the problem.
Do you think a light version of this can actually work in India? Because, I mean, Indian SMEs, what we call them here, also have similar characteristics maybe to some of the businesses that you're serving in the US.
I think so. I think that the biggest advantage is that because the dynamic between any small business and their most loyal customers is very similar. We sort of just chose to launch it in our backyard. I mean, even if you sort of look at Wix as a role model, that's where Golan, our co-founder, came from. The entire company is based in Israel, but they are a global company and very successful in the US. So I think the empathy that companies have developed. Shopify is largely based out of Canada. So there's the problem statement in small businesses is definitely pretty global. There's probably slight nuances and maybe some regulatory differences in some markets. But I agree, and also this pain point is super common. Like even I'm sure like you guys are now small business founders, right? Like you want like SMB tech where you don't want to have a very heavy deployment team and so on to develop these capabilities. When there's only so far that you can go with consumer tools, right? So having that lightweight layer, but from a packaging, from a pricing, from a distribution perspective, this is very different from an enterprise play, which is why it made sense to kind of launch these speedboats versus a very large frigate.
I actually want to unpack that, Anand, because one of our hopes with the show is to get a window into in the moment thinking of founders and operators like yourself. So this is, I mean, you just announced a week ago, so you're clearly very, very early. How are you thinking about building the team? How are you thinking about going to market? How are you thinking about pricing? Just walk us through your thinking.
Yeah, I think that, we were just chatting about having like a very clear vision, but being really iterative on the details. Our sense is that this has to be aligned with the needs of the SMB, right? So, going back to the Crescendo playbook, for 25 years, Crescendo only had a right to exist because for the past 25 years, nobody had done this where they said, we're going to align with the enterprise and we'll only get paid when we meet an outcome, right? And if you went to your labor only BPO, the answer would be fantastic, we can help you out, we'll give you more people. If you went to your software provider, they would say, great, we can help you out, let's give you more seats, right? But the enterprise does not want more people or more seats. They just want an outcome, right? If you did that with AI, if you did that with seats, if you did that with software, that's kind of your problem, right? And that's why you are partnered up with the enterprise. And so I think what we found is a very strong resonance of that vision. And so that's the part that we are very inflexible on, where we know that this vision is very important to manifest, because like we use all these statistics, right? 90% of all businesses are small businesses, and they power such a large chunk of the economy. They power a large chunk of who's employed, but they themselves cannot use the same tools that everybody else seems to be able to use. So that's the part that is like very rigid and inflexible on. In terms of how we launch, the goal is to be like, to build a company in 2025, which is that, speed of iteration and velocity is probably the biggest differentiator. And I think there's also the ability to sort of say, we already know what the playbook looks like, but we have to find out how it applies with this segment, right? So we've been probably working on it for about 4 to 6 months. The core team is in place. We have a good sense for how the company grows. We also, have a great sense for how Crescendo and High Octave are different, right? Like they will not sort of, follow any playbooks just for the sake of following them. There's a deep chemistry and connection between the people involved in both sides, but they're both loyal to their vision and their manifestation of that vision. And Andy and I are common to both companies, and some of the investors are common to both companies. But we both have our mandate and customer base to focus on.
Awesome. Anand, thank you so much for giving us a lowdown on this new venture. And I mean, of course, educating us as always. You raised from 𝗀𝗄𝗧 Ventures as well. We were one of the early investors in OpenAI.
Yeah. I think when Andy and I were chatting about it and we said, what instincts do we want to have on the team? We sort of said, look, on the one hand, we want to have the instincts of an OpenAI. And the other side, we want to have the instincts of a Square, right? Like deep alignment and commitment to serving SMBs. As we sort of thought around to like who we knew that was involved in one or both, like we already knew someone who was on the very early stage journeys of both of those companies. So we're very lucky that Vinod sort of agreed to partner with us.
Amazing.
Afterwards, we realized that Vinod sort of personally is not the sponsor of a lot of deals in the firm. So very lucky to personally work with him at this stage of his incredible career. We've learned a lot, from that collaboration already. And I think we're very excited to continue partnering with him and Samir and Hari and the team over there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us real-time updates. Thank you, Anand.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Great seeing you, Anand.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, folks, that's it for our Friday stream. We'll see you on Monday. Please enjoy this festive weekend. I hope you're being safe and sound. Thank you. Bye-bye.